Each of us in this room have got a different definition of what success is. It means something different for all of us. And I guess my life would have been a lot easier in some ways had I carried on being a primary school teacher, which was what I was doing in 2004 when I started to walk. But what I dreamed of, or what success looked like to me, I suppose, was a big adventure. In particular in the Sahara, where what I wanted to do was travel the Sahara as nomads did, living amongst them as they do. Which sounds fantastic, but when I set off from Trafalgar Square, I had absolutely no idea an enormous pack. And what you can't see behind me is a pack of very chic-looking French women wondering what the fat Australian girl is doing with a huge pack. I did decide to do a training walk down through Europe that first year, which was very valuable. But 12 months later, I found myself in the Sahara with 2 male guides and, unfortunately, no husband. The marriage broke up in the first 12 months. I never quite worked out if he got sick of the walking or me, but either way, it went bad. It was an incredibly big deal for me to find myself there and hoping very much that I was going to finally live my dream, I guess. It was a tremendous year of learning curve for me. Being totally immersed in another culture to the point where you start to dream in Arabic was fascinating. I learnt an immense amount in a very short space of time, but equally it was incredibly isolating. For all that I was learning at the same time, I was also having to learn how to lead men from another culture rather than my own. And I was also having to learn really how to cope in an environment which was completely unfamiliar. By the time I reached the Western Sahara, I'd been walking for over a year and a half. I'd done over 5,000 kilometres. I think by the time I got down here, it was 3,000 through the Sahara. And I'd forgotten how it felt to speak in English. The wonderful thing about the desert, though, is that you never question why you're there. The nomads have a saying that the night is your reward for surviving the desert day. And on one particular evening, I saw this cloud rise up over the mountains, and it looked to me like an enormous bird of freedom. And I thought, this is actually why I'm here, however difficult it may be. By the time I finished in Dakala, that first phase, I planned to do a second walk all the way across west to east across the Sahara, which was another 7,500 kilometres. It was a much different walk, and it would be the first time that I was choosing my own guides and walking without really any other sort of support other than my own brain. I landed in Mauritania at the same time that the Paris-Dakar race was being run or driven, but I was attracting a great deal more attention than the vehicles going past in the background. It was in that atmosphere of pressure that I had to select a first guide to walk me through to Tombouctou, and unfortunately, because of the pressure possibly, I made an incredibly bad choice. This is Haraba, who I came to call Haraba the Horrible. We didn't get along particularly well, Haraba and I, and one of the reasons was that he refused to listen to the way that I wanted the camels packed. What this resulted in, because I was unable to assert myself calmly at this point, was me losing all my satellite communications equipment, my sat phone, my camera, and my sense of humour. I promptly sacked Haraba at the next camp and walked off with my camels, stopped and took this photograph to prove how badly the camels had been packed, at which point the camel stepped forward, stepped on the rope, pulled the nose ring out of its nose and trotted off up the hill, carrying the bag that had my money and passport inside it. Nothing like watching one go and thinking, what on earth am I doing here? It was a very, very long night of camel hunting. I don't ever recommend attempting to catch a camel with no rope on it. But by the end of it, I had decided that I was quite determined to finish it come hell or high water. I'd also learned quite a bit about selecting guides that would help me to succeed. And in the next walk that I was doing, or the next really difficult stretch that I was coming across when I knew I was going to be passing hard country on the way to Tombouctou, I employed Ali, who was just a fantastic guide with a wonderful sense of humour. Ali's not your typical Muslim or nomad. He likes a whiskey and he very much enjoys women, particularly women who've got big backsides. He thinks that's fantastic. A sense of humour was absolutely vital in this situation because we were walking through some of the worst prickle country I've ever seen in my life. This means bindis that get caught in absolutely everything. I was busy pulling them out all the time, but eventually they embed themselves into your skin, and in my case they become very infected. The problem with that is that it's not really customary to complain a great deal. Always good to give you a gross slide. It's not really customary to complain in the culture, so I'm walking along trying to sort of disguise that I'm very much in pain, and finally Ali's way of breaking the ice was to say to me, you know, I can see that you're not very comfortable. I said, why is that? He said, well, normally when you're walking, your zafal, she rolls like this. It's all very calm, but today your zafal, she is like this, up and down. I said, my zafal? He says, yes, your backside, your zafal. I said, you're looking at my zafal? He said, well, I'm on a camel, it's hard, it's right in front of me. For the rest of the walk, we didn't talk about me, we talked about the zafal. So he would say, how are you this morning, Mr. Zafal? I'd say, fabulous, fabulous. And so it was a complete zafal conversation for the rest of it, but it did teach me how important humour is when it's getting pretty ugly out there. By the time I'd hit Niger, I was very, very familiar with living inside a tent, with being amongst nomads. What I perhaps wasn't prepared for and what I had no experience with was civil war, which was what I walked into when I crossed the border. Nobody knew that it was going to happen, and I'd had no warning. Even their own government didn't actually know. Suddenly I was confronted with these gentlemen, although this is not my photograph, I was busy walking the other way, and my walk was finished. I was arrested, jailed, and then eventually deported. For about 2 years afterwards, I think, I lived with a horrible sense that I'd failed in the goal that I'd set for myself. And then eventually I began to think about what it was that I'd originally set out to achieve. Sure, I had finally ended up with a goal of going from west to east, but that was a later goal. Right at the beginning, this was where I got stopped, by the way, where the white peg is. Right at the beginning, my dream had been to walk through the desert and to be part of the culture. In actual fact, I'd spent 2 years, best part of 2 years, and over 7,500 kilometres walking through the Sahara, being very, very happy there. Learning the language, learning the culture, learning the customs. The other part of my goal had been to write a book, and 2 years after my walk, both of my books had been published. And I think the greatest sense of satisfaction or sense of success I had was when I looked at those. What I began to think, really, is that ultimately adventure is as simple as putting one foot outside of your front door. There is not one person in this room who has any more experience at this than I had when I set the first foot forward in Trafalgar Square. But I think where success comes from ultimately is by knowing why it is that you're putting your foot out the front door and then feeling proud of yourself when you've finished it. Thank you very much. I hope you all enjoy your own adventures.